Just a reminder, if you did miss any of our past sessions, we have our YouTube channel where we're recording these because we have in-person attendees, we have virtual attendees. So we are able to record them and then post them on YouTube. We do have a whole playlist for this class on YouTube. So I've got the link in your handout to it. So again, see that link in your handout, or for those virtual folks, I put it in the chat, or it was on the reminder email as well. So today we're talking all about researching in newspapers. I'm Katie Stilp. I'm the local history librarian at Appleton Public Library, and this is our 4th session already. So if you did miss any of our other sessions, it's getting started in genealogy, vital records, and census records. So again, you can watch those on our YouTube channel, and the links that is in your handout. For the in-person people, if you didn't get the link to the handout from Thompson Center, just be sure to get your email address on file with them when you stop at the front desk. I do have a few copies of the handout, as well as a handout from a program I did last week about the overview of genealogy resources that the library has. So you're welcome to enjoy that handout as well. So first, you might be wondering, well, why do we research newspapers with genealogy? Well, if you're not familiar with how great newspapers can be, they, of course, like they do today, they report information on people. So a lot of our ancestors are going to be featured in newspaper articles. Of course, we think of newspapers, we think of obituaries right away. And those are great. They have lots of helpful information, lots of things that we can learn about our ancestors in there. But newspapers also give us more than just obituaries. So lots of great details that you can fill in about your ancestors' life from finding them in newspaper articles. And I'll show you some examples of all the great things that you can find in newspaper articles. Of course, finding your ancestor in the newspaper could also lead you to additional research. So maybe in their obituary or a newspaper article, you find their marriage date or where they were married. And then that's going to lead you to finding an actual marriage record for your ancestors, which might give you more information, like the name of their parents, if it wasn't in their obituary, for example. Or maybe it's going to lead you to a church record. Or maybe you could discover the married name of one of the siblings of your ancestors, or the maiden name of a female, or a hometown where they were born in Germany. There's lots of different things that you can find, and depending on how detailed they are, might determine what additional information you can get from that, and then what hints you can take to try to find additional research on them. Of course, the possibilities of details are endless. You just never know what you're going to find in newspapers. And I'm continually surprised whenever I find newspaper articles about my ancestors that there's just these great little gems. I mean, some stuff's a little more mundane and like, okay, they had a party, so what, but some stuff's really cool and interesting and you can hear stories. So it's really great. Newspapers can also be used in place of records that don't exist. So maybe they mention the death of your ancestor and you don't have an actual death record for them. Maybe that one little line or one little paragraph in the newspaper saying that they died is the only instance you have of knowing that they died and when they died, because maybe they didn't have death records at that point when they died. Also, your ancestor didn't have to be famous to be in the newspaper, to be written about, especially if it's a small community. They had newspapers as well, or maybe they sent reports to a larger newspaper in a nearby community, which could then feature your ancestor. Newspapers also provide a day-to-day account of what was happening where our ancestors lived, and it's going to provide insights into what their life was like in that community during this period of time. So, you can see cool things like the price of food, or the price of clothing, or what businesses were in town that they would have shopped at, things like that. So lots of neat kind of social context. And you can also see historical context, like what was the news reported in their community when the wars were happening, things like that. And the great thing for us genealogists now is that there's more newspapers online than ever there was before. And it's continually adding more and more digitized newspapers to make it even easier to find relevant articles on our ancestors very quickly without much effort, without money, and without having to travel. So you can, do it in your pajamas at 3 in the morning if you're awake and want to search newspaper articles. I'm just going to talk quickly about newspapers so that you can understand. Obviously, newspapers haven't been around for forever. So if you're, researching your colonial ancestors, you're not going to really have luck in newspapers. So of course, except for a single issue attempt in 1690, the first regularly published newspaper in the United States was going to be the Boston Newsletter, and that was published beginning in 1704. So if you're looking at finding stuff for your ancestors in 1600, I'm sorry, your newspapers is not going to be the tool that you're going to use. Unfortunately, though, early US newspapers were kind of a local product designed to convey news of the wider community, the wider world, and not necessarily as local as we think about today when we open up the Post-Crescent and we see all the Appleton news or the surrounding community news and a little bit of world news. It was kind of the exact opposite, where it was a lot of world news at that point. And of course, with those early newspapers, don't expect to find many about your ancestors or even many newspapers at that point, because newspapers were still new at that time. Thank you. Thankfully, with the invention of the industrial revolution, the development of railroads, which helped to allow a wider distribution of newspapers, and the increasingly demand for news, particularly during the Civil War, that's when we start to see a lot more newspapers come up, because everybody, of course, wants to know what's happening with the war. Is it coming to my doorstep? What's going on with my son who's, fighting on the front lines? They want those news stories. They don't want to wait weeks and weeks for letters to hear what's happening with their loved one. So of course, the newspapers are dramatically changing and are beginning to flourish in this time period. So we see a lot of major city daily newspapers that shift to be more international, national, and state news. And then those newspapers that are coming up in those smaller communities then are concentrating on that local news, which we think of today when we open up our local newspaper and see the stuff that's relevant to this geographical area. There's going to be many newspapers that are weekly, beginning in the early 1800s. And that number from daily newspapers grew a lot between 1880 and 1900. You can see it goes from 971 newspapers in 1880 to over 2,000, and that's daily newspapers. And then at the height of newspapers, nearly every county seat in the United States and most towns that had more than 500 or 1,000 sponsored one or more weekly newspapers. So again, even if your ancestor was in a smaller community, they likely had a newspaper or a newspaper nearby that reported that news on that community. Then, unfortunately, since the invention of television, internet, social media, readership has been steadily declining for newspapers. The number of newspapers have greatly decreased, of course, the last 30, 40 years. But during the heyday of newspapers, which is kind of that 1850 time period to about 1970, that's going to be that time period when our most recent ancestors lived. So we're going to be able to find a lot of great information on them in those local newspapers. And we can use these historic newspapers to learn more about their lives. So that's why we want to dedicate a whole session to how to research in newspapers. So now I'm going to briefly talk through and give you a few examples of some of the great things that you can find in newspapers. So birth notices, sometimes you get a little notice about people being born, which is great if you don't have a vital record for them being born. Unfortunately, these notices are kind of unlikely prior to World War I, but I would still check because you never know, you might get lucky. But unfortunately, many of them are really general, like baby boy born to so-and-so. So you can see these examples here. I've got one for my second great grandmother from 1901, just saying, there's a little talk about somebody else having a baby girl born, and then also one to Mr. and Mrs. Richard Gartreck. It doesn't say the name of the child, it just says baby girl. Thankfully, I know, because I actually have a birth record for her, that this is who they're talking about. But then you get other ones like this, from the 1980s that, they give the name of the parents, and then again, sometimes they're given address of a parent, and they're say, if it's a son or a daughter there. So that's kind of the extent of what you get. Occasionally you'll get an actual name of a child in there, but very rarely. Marriages are great to find in the newspapers. So sometimes you get short little mentions of it. Sometimes you get really detailed articles. So you might get a little short notice that they applied for a marriage license. So now you know kind of what county they're applying for a marriage license in. You might get an announcement of their engagement and their impending wedding. You might get a wedding recap, which might even have a photo, like this is who attended, this is who the bridesmaid was, what the bride wore, what the flowers looked like very detailed stuff. You might get a mention of where they went on their honeymoon and they returned back to town after their honeymoon. So you might learn something cool like that. And then there's also really great anniversary articles, usually on those milestone anniversaries like the 25th, the 30th, the 50th, the 75th, which you also might even get a photo. It's really awesome. Sometimes they even give you a photo of like when they got married or like when they were younger, and then a photo of that time period of 75 years later when they're celebrating their 75th anniversary. You might get double photos, which is awesome. And unfortunately, all the marriages didn't work out, so you might even get a divorce mention that there's an upcoming case happening between those people getting divorced. But here you can see an example of a newspaper article about a golden wedding for some of my ancestors, and it's just talking about how they're celebrating their anniversary on November 1st. So now I know, hey, they got married on November 1st. So when I'm looking, I can do the math in my head, figure out 1905 minus 50, and figure out when their exact marriage date was. And if I couldn't do the math in my head, they have the marriage date right here and where they were married, by who, and at what church. So now I can follow up, try to find that church, try to get a church record. So lots of great details. It even talks about where the couple lived after they got married, where they moved to, when they moved to, how old they are. Lots of awesome information that I can now follow up to get additional research done on this couple. Of course, like I mentioned at the beginning, obituaries, that's usually what people think about when they think about newspapers. So you're going to get death notices, obituaries. Of course, the big thing to remember is keep in mind these people didn't write their own obituary. They couldn't. So you want to verify anything that you're finding in an obituary with other sources, of course. These could range from really short mentions like a sentence or a paragraph to really lengthy, obituaries, a report of the funeral and what happened at the funeral, who attended from out of town, things like that. You might even get multiple articles about this person and about their funeral, depending on how prominent they were in that community. Don't forget, there's also probate notices. So we're going to talk about probate a little later this year and the process of that. But if your ancestor died with a will or without a will, what happened to their belongings? So that's what probate is. So you can find little notices about their case going to probate, things like that. Maybe they were ill for a little bit before they passed away. So maybe you're fined a few weeks prior to their death, talking about how they were in the hospital or laid up with some, illness. So don't forget to check kind of before they die to see maybe there's some more information about what they died from. Unfortunately, with our recent pandemic and the cost of printing in newspapers, that's really changed obituaries and death notices and the timing of when we're seeing them in newspapers, or even if they're in newspapers, because it's super expensive to print obituaries in newspapers, and it goes based off word count. So like I had a grandma who died last fall. We spent over $700 on an obituary in the newspaper. It's ridiculous. Not everybody can afford to do that, or they might only put like a little paragraph and then link you to the funeral home website. Well, what are we going to do with that then if it's not in the newspaper? So a little bit later, I'll show you how you can save them from the funeral home website to be able to make sure that you're capturing them in case 10 years from now or 20 years from now, it's not on that funeral home's website anymore. So there's ways that you can capture those, and you want to be sure to capture those so that they don't go into oblivion and then you lose them. So of course, here's an example of a great obituary on one of my ancestors as well. So again, you kind of get some more detailed things in here that you can then follow up and see, this person was born in Germany in this year, came to America at this time, lived here, married this person. So lots of great biographical information that I would then want to follow up with additional records. Other things, of course, are interesting articles about your ancestor or even like a biographical sketch. So this one's a biographical sketch on one of my ancestors from 1896 that talks all about how, in his 40 years, he has seen more of the world than hundreds of good travelers, and talking about how he left Germany at the age of 13 and traveled to all these places in the United States before settling down and homesteading in Oconto County. So now I have all this rich detail about his early life before he came to where he lived the remainder of his life. You can find information about family reunions happening, sometimes even photos of those family reunions. There's legal notices, of course, and we're going to talk about court records in a couple months. But newspapers is sometimes how you get clued into legal notices that are happening. Your ancestor sued so-and-so or got sued by so-and-so, and that case is coming up in the courts. Of course, wartime, lots of information about soldiers going to war or coming home, information on them when they're in service. There's business ads, of course, which is great if your ancestor owned a business, or you can, again, see what kind of prices our ancestors were paying for certain things. There's also real estate transactions. So our last session of the year is going to be about land records, but again, using newspapers, we can learn, so-and-so sold land to so-and-so. This is going to help pinpoint exactly when we want to search for land records during certain time periods. Or you could even track the history of your house by searching your address in the newspaper and finding out, sometimes, especially older newspapers, when they talked about somebody, they listed their address. So you can, type in that address where you live and find out what articles might have happened related to the people who were living in your house or the house of your ancestors. Lots of great social news. So kind of the newspapers were our social media that we think of today, where, people are reporting just the most basic things like so-and-so had a card party, or they did this benefit with the church, things like that, or they went to go visit this relative out of town, or, what involvement they had with different clubs or different organizations or churches, things like that. You can even find school news. So I found this great little mention about my great-grandfather. None of my grandmother or her siblings knew where he went to school. Just by searching his name in the newspaper, I found out he went to Norway Pine School because he received a silver star in writing that week. So apparently he was a great writer. But now I can follow up and learn more about the school. Where was the school located? Are there existing records that might be available to learn a little bit more about his school time? Photos are awesome. You might actually find photos in the newspaper of your ancestors. A couple of years ago, I was just up late one night searching names of my ancestors, and I came across an awesome 5-generation photo that had my third great grandmother and second great grandmother in it. That is the only photo I have of my third great grandmother that is from a newspaper article. So you might get lucky. Of course, you're not going to find photos of every ancestor, but when you do, they're going to be great for you. And of course, you might get historical events or local news stories like, on this date 100 years ago, this happened. And then hey, I should look back and see if there's digitized issues or if I can get access to it offline to find those newspapers from 100 years ago that might briefly mention my ancestor or what was happening in the community at that time. And of course, so much more. Like I mentioned at the beginning, you just never know what you're going to find in newspapers. So over here is also an example of an ad that, my ancestor was a boot and shoemaker, and he had a store on College Ave. So I can see, he's offering a special price in his line of trade and custom work and, what he's doing with his boot and shoe store and where it's located. Any questions at this point? We've got a lot more to cover, but that's kind of just the tip of the iceberg of what you might be able to find in newspapers. Any questions with our online folks? Throw the handout link in the chat again for those who came late. Yes.
Do most newspapers have information online, or is that less?
It really depends on the community. So we're dive into the electronic resources and then what to do if you don't find that newspaper online. So that's going to be the bulk of our talk today is covering that and how to find out if your newspaper that you're looking for is online or if it's not online. Yeah. So if you get lucky, you'll find a good chunk of them. Like I said, there's more and more newspapers that have been digitized and put online than there were even 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and they're constantly adding more.
So that's okay, so it's developing.
Yes, and it's continuing. So there's millions and millions, maybe even billions of newspapers online. So let's see, where can I get newspapers? We are going to cover that. That's going to be the next segment here. So I kind of developed this little chart to kind of help you determine, okay, how do I find a newspaper? How do I find out where it is? And how do I find my ancestors in it? So this is going to be the bulk of our talk today, me going through these steps with you and hopefully helping you feel confident about how to find your ancestors in newspapers. So kind of the first step is we have to figure out what's even the name of the newspaper where my ancestor lived. If you don't know it off the top of your head, which I'm anticipating most of you don't, you might know, of course, like Appleton, we have the Appleton Post-Crescent. You might know that off the top of your head if you live here, but if your ancestors didn't live here, or you don't know what the name of the newspaper was in their community, you need to know how to figure it out. So I'm going to show you that. And then you're going to figure out, okay, is it online? If it's online, I'm going to explore some newspaper databases. So there's going to be free databases or other free sites that we can use. And then unfortunately, there's also some that are going to be paid subscriptions. So not everything's free. Unfortunately, I wish it all was because I'm a cheapskate too, and I don't want to pay for it all, but thankfully we have lots of great free resources I can show you and then talk to you a little bit about how to try to make the most of your money for those subscription sites. But like I mentioned, not everything is online. So we do maybe have to do some offline research. So we need to figure out what library might have microfilm of that newspaper if it's not online. So once I figure that out, I need to browse the microfilm. Or if I can't go there, I need to contact the library. So there's a couple different things that you might use to contact the library, figuring out, do they have an index of what's included in that newspaper? Or could I interlibrary loan that microfilm and get it sent here to Appleton so I don't have to travel to New Jersey where the newspaper is? Or can I get copies mailed or emailed of the certain things that I'm looking for? So that's kind of the workflow of what we're going to talk through today and how to figure out if we're able to find those newspapers for our ancestors. So first things first, you got to figure out the newspaper name. So for US newspapers, we have this really great tool through Chronicling America. It's called US Newspapers and American Libraries. So it used to be called this US Newspaper Directory. And I'm going to show you in a little bit. So Chronicling America is getting ready to change their site a little bit. So I'm going to show you the new version. You might be familiar with the older version and how that works. And I'll show you if you still want to use the old version, you can still use it for a little bit, but sometime in this spring, they're going to be changing it. So I might as well show you the new version of it because that's what it's going to be going forward. But this is a really helpful tool for US newspapers. If you don't know the name of the newspaper or what date that newspaper covered, because of course, newspapers came and went. They didn't always stay there for hundreds and hundreds of years. And it also shows the name changes for newspapers. So before our Post-Crescent was called the Post-Crescent, it was actually two separate newspapers, the Appleton Crescent and Appleton Post. So it merged at a certain point. So it's going to show you those titles that it was before it merged. So that you know, this is the title that I'm actually looking for during this time period when my ancestors might have lived there. So now I'm going to show you how to use this resource. So it's a link in your handout. You just go to the Library of Congress website, or you can just Google it. If you don't want to use that link in your handout, just Google this Directory of US Newspapers and American Libraries. So what you can do is you can use these filters over here on the side to narrow down to a certain state. So first you want to expand all the states so that you can see all the states. And then you got to skim through to figure out, okay, where is my state that I'm looking for? Well, here's Wisconsin right here. So you click on Wisconsin first, so that narrows down to just the Wisconsin newspapers first. And then continue over here on the side. Then I want to narrow it down to a certain county in Wisconsin because I don't want to look through all of them. I just want a certain county. So you might need to click more counties to get a full listing to then be able to find what county you're looking for.
Is this a free site?
This is a completely free site. You don't need a library card. All you need is the internet to go to it.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm gonna try to show you as many free stuff as I can, trust me. So now we're narrowed down to Oconto County, or not Oconto, Outagamie County, I'm sorry. So now I can browse through quickly and see what newspapers are covered during that certain time period. If I wanted to, I could narrow it down by city. I could narrow it down by language because there was a certain time period where they had German newspapers or Spanish newspapers or other languages that our immigrant ancestors spoke that they wanted news in those languages. You could also narrow it down by date or by title over here. So you can see here's a listing for the Appleton Crescent, which was, you can see the dates here, published from 1853 to 1919. So this is a precursor to our current Appleton Post Crescent. So if you click on it, you get a little bit more information about this newspaper. So it tells you maybe another title it was possibly known by, when it was published, who the publisher was, which you don't really need to know. Maybe some headings like what kind of subjects they reported on. So it's of course this local community of Appleton and Outagamie County. You can see down here it was a weekly newspaper, and then it stopped being published in 1919. You can see it's also on microfilm at the Wisconsin Historical Society. It was the official paper of the county at the time. So you can see all these little details in here. What you can also do is you can see up here, there's a link that says libraries that have it. So if I click on that, it's going to give me a little listing of libraries that have it. So if I live in Massachusetts, great. If I live in Washington, D.C., great. Richmond, Virginia, New York, Albany, all these
have the Appleton Post Crescent.
These have the Appleton Post Crescent. But notice here, sometimes it's only like 1 or 2 issues. So you can see kind of there's some date coverage here. And then of course the Wisconsin Historical Society. But I want to caution you that this is not always 100% accurate. It doesn't include every single library at this point that has it. This kind of gives you a little snapshot of the major libraries that have it. So you can see Appleton Public Library is not listed on here. We have that microfilm. We should be listed there, but we're not a major library, I guess. So you always want to double check, of course, with the local communities that might have that newspaper on microfilm, because this might not be a complete listing. And you can see there's also a last updated date on here. So a lot of these are from the 80s and 90s. So that's been a long time, the 80s and 90s, even though sometimes it feels like it was just yesterday. That was, 30, 40 years ago. So I would always double check with that library, make sure they still have it, make sure that they have the dates that you're looking for before you go rush to Madison to take a trip or try to order that microfilm or order a copy of that obituary or thing that you're looking for. So always double checking the information that you find on here, because it might be a smidge out of date. Does that make sense on how to use that? If you do have a certain title of a newspaper, instead of going through and clicking the state and the county and the city and all that stuff, they also have this advanced search area. So you kind of have to click this little plus arrow to get the advanced search. And then what you can do, we're going to clear that search out because it's narrowing down to Outagamie County first. All right, so my search is all cleared out. So what I can do right here under keywords is I can type in the name of a newspaper. So I can put in Oconto County Reporter. I know that's the name of a newspaper. I can narrow down certain things if I want to, or if I know that that's the name of that I'm looking for, I can just click that search button after I put in that name of that newspaper. Now I can scroll down to the results, and now I can see there's a couple listings here, but now I can click on it and then be brought into that similar record like we just looked at for the Appleton Crescent, and see when it was published, where it was published, if it's a weekly, if it's a daily, any cool things like that. And then again, what newspapers that have it. That sound great? Like it's easy to use? So this is the new version of it. So if you do go to the Chronicling America site, it might look a little different because it might still be that old version, but this is the new version that pretty soon they're going to replace that link with this new version. All right, so again, be aware that the holdings information might be a little out of date and does not include all the locations that have microfilm. So again, for example, Post Crescent, they have it at the Wisconsin Historical Society, but it doesn't list that Appleton has it. And actually Nina also has the Appleton Post Crescent on microfilm for certain years. So again, always double check with those local libraries that might have
Are they
it.
the same years? Do they overlap, Appleton and Nina?
There is some overlap, but at Appleton we have more than what they have at Nina. It also doesn't include on this site if the information on, if the title has been digitized anywhere. It doesn't say, hey, you can find this title on newspapers.com or on Genealogy Bank, any of these resources I'm going to talk about. Unfortunately, it'd be great if it did have a little nice link telling you exactly where to find it, but you unfortunately have to do that work yourself. And I'm going to show you how to do that. So my advice to you is kind of use that tool to find the name of that newspaper. And then you're going to search the online databases first to see, has that newspaper been digitized anywhere? Or you could even just start at the newspaper databases and search what they have in that community. But be aware then you're also only limiting yourself to what's available online and missing out on potential resources that are offline for you that might have really great resources on your ancestor. Because not everything's online, nor will it probably ever be in our lifetimes. If you don't find the title online, what you can do is you can search the newspaper title in what's called WorldCat. So this is a world catalog of a lot of libraries around the world. Not every single library is included in WorldCat, unfortunately, but it has some more accurate title information or information on what years they might have in there, information on how to access it offline especially. I'm going to show you just quickly how to use WorldCat, and there's a couple of things that you want to make sure to do, like selecting all libraries, or if you just want to look at public libraries, there's an option to check that. And pay attention to formats, because sometimes there's multiple formats. You know, they might have a print version of a newspaper if it still is printing. They might have microfilm versions of it. They might have it digitized on CD. There's lots of, or they might have electronic resources that are all included in WorldCat. And then the great thing about this site is that it gives you the libraries that are closest to you. So you can see, oh, hey, they have it at Appleton Public Library. Oh, the closest one's Brown County Library in Green Bay. So you can see where it is and how far of a distance it is for you. So the website for it's just worldcat.org. And right here, all you have to do is search in this main search bar for that book, that article, that newspaper title that you're looking for. It's got everything you could think of for resources. So again, I could type in that Oconto County Reporter that I wanted to look at before and click search. And so sometimes you might see other things that are not related to newspapers over there. But then you can see right here, newspaper. So that's what I want to click on to learn a little bit more. And so this is what I was talking about when I meant all libraries. So right away, it defaults as featured libraries. So these are like the big name libraries that it wants you to go to. But I want you to click on all libraries first, so that it shows you every single library it has. Because if you notice, on featured libraries, it says Brown County Library is our closest one, and then Wisconsin Historical Society. But if I click on all libraries, InfoSoup, that's us. So not always the most accurate unless you click on the all libraries. And then right here, if you only wanted to do public libraries, because of course there are some what they call academic libraries that are at, colleges. If you didn't want to go visit one of those, you only wanted to stick to public libraries, you could check that box to only give you results for public libraries. So once you see that, hey, it's here, or like, hey, it says InfoSoup, but like InfoSoup is a whole library system. So we don't have the actual microfilm of this Oconto County title at Appleton, but the Oconto Library is part of InfoSoup. So it's not very clear here which library in InfoSoup has it until you investigate a little further. So what I always encourage you to do is once you find the information here on WorldCat, then go pull up that InfoSoup catalog or that Brown County Library catalog and search for it, because then it's going to tell you where it has it and what years they have it. Does that make sense? All right. So again, once you see the library has a title, want to search in that library's catalog to see what details, what coverage that they have, and verify that the information in WorldCat's correct. For example, if you pull up on WorldCat, the post-crescent microfilm, it's really hard to tell that Neenah Public Library also has it, but that they only have it from 1950 to 2021. So it just says, hey, we have post-crescent. It doesn't say what years until you go into the Neenah Public Library catalog or give them a call at Neenah Public Library and say, hey, I heard you guys have microfilm of post-crescent. What years do you have? Because if you're going to search for 1920 and you show up at Neenah, unfortunately, they don't have it for that year. So you want to make sure that they have it before you go rush there to take a visit. If you aren't tech savvy, you don't want to go through all this WorldCat and figuring out the name of a newspaper and all that stuff, go ahead and call that library, call Neenah Library or call Wisconsin Historical Society where you're thinking has that newspaper, or call us at APL and we will get you the library's contact information. If you're like, hey, I'm looking for, a library that has Oconto County Reporter, we, know how to do all that stuff and then find the contact information for you. Again, not all libraries are on that WorldCat site. So be sure, again, to ask those local libraries in those geographic areas where you're researching, where that newspaper is published. If I'm looking for Oconto County Reporter, I'm definitely going to call the Oconto County libraries that are in that area and find out, do they have it on microfilm, even if I didn't find it on WorldCat. If they don't have microfilm of it, they might even actually know where they can get it, because I'm sure that's not the first time they've gotten that question. So they know where to refer you to and where is going to be the easiest place to access it. Or they might even be able to say, oh yeah, that's digital. We've got it here on this website. Here you go. This is exactly how you search it. So librarians are your friends. You might not know, of course, the name of a library in the area, especially if you're not familiar with that area where your ancestors lived. So we're going to use Google to search. So you would type in something like libraries near Peoria, Illinois, if that's where you're researching for your ancestors. So you just go to Google, google.com. You type in libraries near that location, that city, that state, and then click search. Now it's going to give me a little map here on the side, or little, phone numbers. It's going to show, different results. Maybe this library has different branches. I'm always looking for a downtown one or a main one, if it's called the main branch or the central branch or the downtown branch. Those are usually the ones that are larger and that have a local history genealogy section for you and are going to have newspapers on microfilm or have the amount of staff that are really people who know where to find their local history materials. So right here, you can see their phone number. If you wanted to, you could look at the results and see, hey, there's websites. Now I can go into the Peoria Public Library's website, search information to see what local history and genealogy stuff they have, or browse their catalog, depending on how tech savvy you are or not. And again, if you're like, hey, this seems like a little too much for me, just go ahead and give us a call at APL and say, hey, I'm looking for a phone number for a library in this area. And we are more than happy to search it for you and give you that phone number. So again, you could go to those websites, search, they have information. Again, look for that main, that central, that downtown branch. Another great local tip for any of you in Wisconsin or the Appleton area. If you see that Wisconsin Historical Society has microfilm of that newspaper that you're looking for, either from that Library of Congress directory or from WorldCat, or if you even search within the UW-Madison Library catalog, which catalogs all the stuff at the Wisconsin Historical Society, if you see that newspaper name and you see that they have it there, we can get it sent here for you to Appleton. So you don't have to drive all the way to Madison. We can get it sent on what's called interlibrary loan for free for you so that you can browse the microfilm on our microfilm machine without having to travel to Madison. Again, if it seems way too complicated, just come visit me or give us a call and say, hey, I'm trying to get microfilm of this newspaper from this time period. You are limited to 5 requests at a time for interlibrary loan. So that means 5 rolls of microfilm, or if you want 3 rolls of microfilm and 2 books, that's 5 requests total. So once you, have browsed those and returned them, then you can, again, get up to 5 requests. So be aware.
The Wisconsin Historical Society?
Yes, so any microfilm that the Wisconsin Historical Society has, we can get sent here at Appleton. And they have more than just Wisconsin newspapers. So even if you're looking for a New Jersey ancestor, I found a New Jersey obituary, a New Jersey microfilm at Madison at the Wisconsin Historical Society. So do you guys want me to show you quick how to search in the UW-Madison Library catalog to pull up what Wisconsin Historical Society has, or you think that's a little too complicated for you?
You have to go through UW-Madison?
Yes, because that's who catalogs the Wisconsin Historical Society stuff. Okay. So if you go to the Wisconsin Historical Society website and click on their library catalog, it brings you into UW-Madison's catalog. Do you want me just to show you an example quick?
Yeah, please. Sure.
Yes. And if you do decide, hey, I'm gonna go visit Madison and hang out there for the day and search all the microfilm, you're gonna wanna search your titles first to get the microfilm number, because they have a very large microfilm room that's very overwhelming, that you can't just go to a drawer and figure out exactly where the microfilm is. They have like bigger than this room full of microfilm. So you come to the catalog website, right here, you just put in your keyword, Oconto County Reporter. That's what I'm looking for, that newspaper title. Click submit. And now you can see the results down here. So you can see, what years they might have, and then just click on it. And then it will show you, just like you're looking up a book or something, it'll show you, hey, we have microfilm. This is the number you're looking for. If you want to go to Madison and look up that microfilm number, that's the number you want to write down on your sheet of paper that says, that's the microfilm number I want. It's a weird number, but that's how they categorize their microfilm and know exactly which drawer to pull out to find that microfilm. But now I can see down here what years they have. So if you're looking for a specific year, you can see it's all kind of sequential as to what number microfilm it is. So if you know you're looking for a certain year, like June 4th of 1925 to September 1925, this is the number I want to write down. Because I know that's the exact roll that I'm looking for those dates. And you can see all the different years they have with what months and dates, and then what the microfilm number is. So again, if that seems too complicated and you're like, I have no clue, I just want to order the microfilm, come visit me or give us a call at the librarian. We've got a special interlibrary loan librarian who is an expert at finding you exactly what microfilm you want and getting it to Appleton for you. Another way you could figure out those newspaper titles, remember last month when we talked about census records, we talked that there was a special census record called the Social Statistics Schedule that covers the years of 1850 to 1880. So these are, really, really historic newspapers, and it will tell you, like you can see in this example, what the newspaper names are, what the character of the newspaper was, because at that certain time they're like, oh, they had Republican newspapers and Democrat newspapers, and they were at odds. And then how often they were published, and then what the circulation was, but you don't need to worry about the circulation, but you might want to know, hey, it's a weekly newspaper, and this is the title of the newspaper. So if it's easier for you to pull up those census records and get this special social statistics schedule to figure out a newspaper name, you could do it that way too. But I feel like the newspaper directory that I showed you already is a little easier, but you never know. Some people it might be more simple to just pull up an image quick to look at that. And then of course you could do what I already showed you look in those databases that we're going to look at in a few minutes that have the digitized newspapers, or search in WorldCat, or search in those local libraries to see, okay, who has this Jasper Free Press that I'm looking for? And again, if you missed our census talk, there's a video recording on YouTube that you can go refresh your brain on what it is and how to find these social statistics schedules. So unfortunately, you still might not find a name of a newspaper, or maybe that town where your ancestor lived didn't have a newspaper. Pull up Google Maps, just go to Google, type in maps for an area, or go pull up a paper map if you still have a paper map. See what other larger cities or towns are around that area. Or maybe there was a whole newspaper that covered the whole entire county, because maybe there's smaller communities. So there's Oconto County Reporter, for example. If I'm looking for my ancestors who lived in Suring, there was a Suring newspaper for a short time period, but then after that newspaper closed, a lot of their news got reported in the Oconto County Reporter. So you might want to search county-wide before diving deeper into the city or the town of that newspaper. Or if you see that that city or town only covered a certain amount of time before that newspaper closed, look at your county or look at the next biggest town or city near that area. Also think about border towns or neighboring states, because, you know, if you think about it, if our ancestors lived on that border of Wisconsin and Upper Michigan, maybe it wasn't reported in a Wisconsin newspaper, even if they were technically living in Wisconsin, because the next biggest newspaper was in Upper Michigan. So, or like La Crosse or, you know, Eau Claire, those kind of border areas, you know, maybe they're reported in Minneapolis or whatever. Also be aware, you know, sometimes long-term residents, they might have lived there for their whole life and then they moved away like right before they died, or they died when they were visiting somebody. It might still be featured in that hometown newspaper where they lived the majority of their life. We see a lot of people in Appleton yet, you know, they lived the last 2 years of their life in Florida and that's where they died, but they still print an obituary sometimes in the Appleton newspaper because they lived in Appleton their whole life, most of their whole life. And of course, don't forget, sometimes those borders have changed over time. So we've got this Heritage Quest census map tool where you can figure out what the borders are during various snapshots in time, which are the census years of every 10 years. So I'll show you quickly again how to pull that up. So you're going to start at our website, apl.org. You're going to click on eLibrary. So that's going to give you an A to Z listing of all of our library's databases. Since we know we're looking for a genealogy one, I can click on genealogy to narrow it down to just the genealogy ones. And I'm looking for Heritage Quest. That's one that you can access free from home. And right here, they make it easy for you at Heritage Quest, where you can just click on Census Map Guide. So now I can click on one of the states I'm looking for. And now I can see this is what Illinois looked like in 1800. Then I can click, this is what it looked like in 1860. And you can see all the different borders and how they've changed and look at it in these certain snapshots. So you can see what's in black is that time period of 1840. What's in white behind it is what the current boundaries are. So you can see this certain Will County was a little larger than it is now and is a little different borders than what it is now. So you can do this for every state in the United States for all the census years. Starting, I think they all go back all the way to 1790. Obviously, Illinois at that point wasn't considered a state, so that's why you only get up to 1800. But then they should go up to like the 1920s, 1930s. That seem easy to use? You also might be wondering about international newspapers, so that could be a whole nother talk. But there are some resources that we have at the library that are world collections that feature some international countries. So I would always start there first, start with those free databases that we offer you, which we're going to dive into in a little bit. You can also find some newspaper titles of international places through the Family Search Wiki. So I've showed you that already. If you go to familysearch.org/wiki, and then you can search the name of the country plus the word newspapers. So for example, if I search Germany newspapers, I get a whole entry all about German newspapers, and it's gonna show me certain, German words for newspapers. It's gonna talk to me about some resources, how to do effective research, German newspapers, even in the United States, things like that, and give me some links and things or helpful things that I can click on to learn a little bit more about researching newspapers in that area. They would be in German. Don't let that scare you though. There's a thing called Google Translate.
Yeah.
It is your friend. You never know. In the German newspaper, they might list what hometown in Germany your ancestor is from. It is so worth it to try to figure out what it says in German, because the German version might be better than the English version of their obituary. True story. There's also this really great guide that the Library of Congress created called the Foreign Newspaper Guide. Be aware it does link you to some resources that do require a subscription. So even though this guide is free, it might link you to a resource that you would have to pay for in order to access that actual newspaper title. But this is, again, a link in your handout that you can see. There's all these different countries, all these different resources it links you to, and any of these blue links you can just click on and explore. So lots of resources, lots and lots of resources. They've got it broken down by country if you scroll down a little bit. So those are the resources I would start at if I'm trying to research international titles. That sound good so far? Before we dive into all the online resources, that's the really fun part. See if we got any questions here. How would you drill down to locating an ancestor using the Chronicling America website? I'm going to show you that in just a minute. I'm going to show you how Chronicling America has some digitized newspapers and how to find your ancestors there. What we looked at before on Chronicling America was just the directory of how to figure out a newspaper name, but now we're going to talk about all the online sites where you can find these digitized newspapers in your pajamas if you want to. So the easiest thing to do if you're researching newspapers is to hopefully pray to the genealogy gods and say, give me online access to it. Hopefully that will solve the majority of your newspaper wants, and you would find every single newspaper you want digitized. It's unfortunately not realistic, but hopefully you'll be lucky and the majority will be online. Unfortunately, there's no magic tool that gives you a listing of every single newspaper in every single database. You have to kind of check each of them individually, unfortunately. Again, some of them are free, some of them are paid, some of them have free versions and paid versions. So it's fun to try to figure it all out, but I'm going to hopefully give you a good overview of what's available and what the main ones are today. Again, not everyone's digitized, not everyone's online, or not all of it's online. Maybe just a certain year coverage is online, and then the rest of it you have to get microfilm. So lots more newspaper sites that we can cover today. So there might be other newspaper sites where that one newspaper you're looking for is available on. You might just need to do a little bit of digging to try to find it. And again, use your librarians of your local library to, if you have tried searching as hard as you can, you've tried all the sources I've talked to you about, come figure out and we'll see if we can find it online somewhere or how you can get access to it if it's not online. So kind of the big four newspaper places we're going to talk about: newspapers.com, Newspaper Archive, Chronicling America, and Genealogy Bank. They're not the only ones available. Those are kind of the four most popular and have the most coverage. So if you're going to start with any of the newspaper sites, I'd start with those four. We at the library have several newspaper databases. I'm also going to show you that you can use for free. If you don't live near the Appleton Library, of course, for our virtual folks, check with your local libraries, see what databases they might have. And of course, other libraries have different databases than us. For example, Menasha Public Library has Newspaper Archive. We don't have it at Appleton. Or Brown County Library has a great Wisconsin historical newspaper collection database that I really want us to buy at APL, but they keep telling me they don't have money for it yet, but I'm going to keep trying. So I'm constantly trying to get more databases for you guys, but unfortunately, we don't have unlimited money at the library. So utilize your other local libraries, because in Wisconsin, you can get a library card for almost every Wisconsin library. The only exceptions are Milwaukee and Madison. You have to live in those areas to get cards there. But for example, if you wanted a Manitowoc library card, all you got to do is travel to Manitowoc for the day and sign up for the library card. Then you can use what resources they have through their card. So the first one I'm going to dive into is newspapers.com library edition, because we at APL have a free access to the library edition. So there's a library edition of newspapers.com and a paid edition of newspapers.com. So there's a big difference between the two. The paid version offers a lot more newspapers, a lot more dates in those newspapers. Unfortunately, we have no control over what's involved in the library edition. We just get to pay for it and get it. And we can't say, hey, you have to include this newspaper on it. You know, we don't get to make those decisions. But we do have a world collection of it that has access to, of course, US states. All the states are on there. Not every newspaper that, again, is on the paid edition is on there. They also have Canada, Australia, England, Ireland, and Puerto Rico. If you're looking for more than those international countries, they do have more on the paid version. I've got some details in your handout about what the cost is for the paid edition. They also do offer some free access weekends, like usually random times like President's Weekend or something. They have like, you can access everything in their site for free for that weekend. So, you know, block off that weekend in your calendar when you hear about that it's coming up, and research to your heart's content for that weekend and do it for free. They also have a free 7-day trial if you wanted to do that. You do need to go to our library's website in order to access the library edition, because if you just type in newspapers.com and try to go there, it's going to try to get you to pay for it, because that's the paid version. So we want to make sure we're using the library edition if you're wanting to use the free version of what we have accessible. Again, that library edition, less titles than the paid subscription, and there are 2 different versions of a paid subscription. So if you do a paid one, there's a basic one or a publisher's extra, which has way more than the basic one. And of course, there's different fees for that. And depending on if you want to sign up for a monthly or every 6 months, there's different costs. And again, I've got those details in your handout for you.
Do we have to come to the library in order to access that, or can we do it online?
Newspapers.com library edition is completely free from home.
Just go to the Appleton
Yes,
library.
and I'm going to show you how to go to the library's website and how to use it in just a second.
Okay.
So yeah, you can access it free from home without needing to come to the library. Unfortunately, Post Crescent, which is our local newspaper, it's only on the paid version. Again, the library has no control over it. I so wish it was in the library edition, but it's not. There is a link in your handout that tells you what newspapers are on the paid edition. And you can also, of course, see what newspapers are on the library edition for free as well. Even before you sign up with a subscription for newspapers.com, you can see what newspapers are covered in that paid edition before you decide, hey, I'm going to pay, or hey, I'm going to do that 7-day trial. You can always check what newspaper titles they have in that resource. Thankfully, searching is the same in the library edition and the paid edition. So if you at some point decide to get the paid edition, it's going to be the same. Again, it's just the paid edition has more newspapers, and there's a fewer features that you can use in the library edition, like you can save certain clippings or save searches in a paid version of it. So again, I'm going to show you exactly how it works. You want to start at the APL site. Again, we're going to go to that eLibrary link, because that's a listing of all of our databases. This is where you're going to find every single database the library has. I can either narrow it down by genealogy, or we have a separate newspaper one. So if I know, hey, I'm researching newspapers for sure, you can click on newspapers. That's going to give you all of our newspaper ones. So you can see newspapers.com library edition right there. That's what you're going to click on to get there. And so this is what the library edition looks like. So what you can do is you can do a keyword search right here and search for your ancestor's name. So I always put in quotation marks if I'm searching a name, like a first name and a last name. because the database needs to know to search that title together instead of giving me every instance of the first name and every instance of the last name. Otherwise, you're gonna have way too many results. So make sure to put that name in quote marks.
Doesn't matter if last name first or first name.
I would search it both ways.
Okay.
Yep, so search it first name, last name, and then after you've looked at all those results, go back and search last name, first name. Because sometimes in newspaper articles, they might be inverted like that. You can put a date in there optionally if you want to, or a range of dates. Like if you know your ancestor only lived a certain time period, you can put that in there right away. You can narrow it down by location. If you know they only lived in Wisconsin, why would you want to search through all the results that might be from New York? It's not going to be relevant for you. You don't have to. It's completely optional. So for example, you could type in Wisconsin and just make sure you select it before you hit that search button. Even if I narrow it down to Wisconsin, it still shows me on the map here that there's other results in other states. So if I thought, well, maybe he lived in Ohio before he came to Wisconsin, I could click on that and see the Ohio ones as well. But for right now, it's just showing me these Wisconsin ones. So there's a couple different options up here. You can do a sort. So I always recommend sorting oldest newspaper date first, because it's going to give you that oldest newspaper, like the 1690 newspaper or the 1900 newspaper, to current. So that helps me figure out chronologically where I'm going in time. That's what I personally do. You can use any of these other filters or categories. You can play with it. You can narrow it down by certain newspaper titles if you wanted to. You could even further narrow down. If you scroll down a little bit on this calendar or the map side, you can see you can narrow it down by certain counties in the state if you wanted to. Like if I only want the Dane County ones, I can click on it and now I get only 10 results instead of the 20 some I had before. So play around with this a little bit if you want to. This kind of gives you a little snapshot of the newspaper, tells you what newspaper title is, what page it is, what date it's from, what city it's from. And then if I actually want to look at the newspaper, I would want to click on that picture of it, and then it's going to bring me into the actual newspaper. So now I can see what this newspaper article is about. I can use the zoom in over here, the little plus, or the little minus will zoom out. This little button that's kind of got that sun and the moon looking thing, that'll make, you allow it to make it brighter if you need to, or make it darker if you need to. Especially if you find photos of your ancestor in the newspaper, you might want to play with this because the photos sometimes are a little dark. So you might want to brighten it up if it's hard to read, or play with the contrast a little bit if you wanted to. From here, I could save this article if I want to. So there's buttons up here that say print/download. So what I could do is I can download that whole page, or if I just want to select a certain portion of that page and just click that one article, I can do that. If you do hit the select portion of a page, it's going to give you this little box. So you kind of move it to where you want it. And then you might need to zoom in, zoom out, or click around a little bit to move that box. All these little blue circles allow you to kind of click right by it and then move it along with your mouse to kind of draw a nice little box around that article that you want to click. Then over here, I can save it as a JPEG, which is an image file, or as a PDF. The great thing about the PDF, I'll show you if I click that, it's going to download and then it's going to tell me exactly what newspaper I got it from, what date, what page. So that citation that's super important for us, it's right here. So, and then it gives me, again, that article. The only reason why I wouldn't use that JPEG option is if it's a really long article, it's going to make it super small in this view. So if you want to make sure you can read the article again, you want to download the whole entire page of it, or that, zoomed in article, but download the image version of it instead of the PDF. So you can zoom into that because sometimes these really long ones aren't very readable on the PDF. The other great thing that you can do on this site without even searching, if you're like, hey, I'm just really curious what newspaper titles they might have. If I go back to the home page, or even from that search page, I could have clicked on papers. And so this is the area where you can see what newspapers are included in here. I can either click on the map and start going that way, or I can just filter by a certain newspaper name or a specific location. So I could type in Appleton if I wanted to. And hit enter. And then it's going to show me, oh, there's an Appleton, Missouri newspaper. There's a bunch of titles with Appleton in it. There's more results if I want to click on see more, and it's going to give me all of them. Oh, come on. Well, now it's deciding not to load, but you can see there's lots of different newspapers based on the title of what it is or where it's located. Again, you could even refine these. So if I'm like, hey, I just want the Appleton in Wisconsin because there's Appletons elsewhere. They must have taken out the Appleton motor in here. How interesting. Because they used to have the Appleton motor. So they sometimes like to change things in newspapers.com. Yeah, they must have taken out the Appleton motor. Bummer. That was a cool weekly newspaper for a short time period that used to be on newspapers.com. So that's another, unfortunately, sometimes they take out newspaper titles however they want to. They might have moved it to the paid edition now, unfortunately.
The different colors on your map.
Yes, so the different colors on the map, the darker it is, the more newspaper results there are in that area. So you can see the really, really dark ones are the biggest. You'll find the most newspapers in California, Nebraska, New York, all these kind of darker ones. The lighter ones are the ones they don't have as many newspapers in the library edition, at least. The paid edition is a little bit different, of course, because again, they offer more newspapers in there. For those virtual people, if you've got questions, type them into the chat or the Q&A box. If I live in a different state, how can I access your database through the website? You're going to have to check with your own local library. Unfortunately, if you don't live in Wisconsin, you can't get a library card through Appleton Public Library. All right. Yes.
If you would like a library card, let's say, if I would like a library card at Brown County, do I need to go there physically, or can it be done online or?
So some libraries, you can start the process online and they'll give you a temporary library card for about 30 days, where you could at least start using their electronic databases. But in order to get an actual library card, an actual library card number to continue using those resources, you have to go there, unfortunately. Yeah. But again, any Wisconsin resident, you can go to Brown County or Needham and Asha. They're a different system than Appleton. So you can get a library card for those and start collecting library cards all across the state. Because again, we all have different resources. We all have different funding and different databases that we try to pay for. So any questions on the library edition of newspapers.com? Our next one is Newspaper Archive. So unfortunately, we used to have a subscription, but we don't any longer. So at the end of 2022, the people who own Newspaper Archive decided, hey, we're going to change our subscription model. So you as a library system can't purchase it. We're going to make every single library in that system pay for it. And that's not realistic for all of the libraries to be able to pay for all of it. So we decided it just wasn't worth our cost and the limited amount of Appleton newspapers that they had in it. So check with your local libraries to see if you can get access to Newspaper Archive. I do know that Needham and Asha do have access to it. So go sign up for a library card through them, or get that temporary library card for those first 30 days. And then within those 30 days, go visit them in person to get your real library card. They do have a Wisconsin titles only subscription. Newspaper Archive does have more than just Wisconsin titles, but for those local libraries right now, we just have a Wisconsin titles. They do offer other subscriptions. So maybe other libraries might have that world collection, or if you're in Illinois, maybe an Illinois library has just an Illinois title collection. So there's kind of different levels of subscriptions that libraries can purchase or people can subscribe to. So just like newspapers.com, they have a paid version as well that offer you a 7-day free trial if you want to try it out first. It also gives you a subscription to what's called Storied, which I'd never heard of before, but this a genealogy site that allows you to capture stories and relationships beyond the traditional family tree, which I haven't played with myself because I don't have a subscription. So they do have a free option on the site for storied, but to get to newspaper archive, you either have to go through a library edition or pay for a paid subscription for yourself. Again, I do have a listing of what newspapers they have in that paid edition in your handout. So if you're curious and perhaps maybe want to explore what resources they have, if you get a subscription, you can check that out. The date coverage might be a little misleading though. So last time when we had newspaper archive, it said post-Crescent coverage from 1853 to 1976, which you think, awesome, that's a huge time period, but it's not complete coverage. So it might be missing 10 years within there or 20 years within there, or it might only have like 5 issues of in 1 year, and then there's a big gap in coverage for 10 years or 15 years. So for example, they only had 11,000 pages for post-Crescent from that time period. Well, that's not every single issue from that time period. So just be aware, even if you subscribe to it, it just might not have the exact dates you're looking for, or it might be a little misleading. So investigate a little bit more before you purchase it for sure, or again, utilize those free versions through the libraries. So I can't show you a demo of that one since I don't have a subscription or a library subscription through it, and we just only have so much time. I'm already running along, of course. If anybody really wants a demo of it at the end, I do have a Menasha one I can use and show you, but just for time, we're gonna skip through. So Chronicling America, that's the one I showed you. They have that newspaper directory, but they also have some digitized issues of newspapers for free on their site. Completely free. You don't need a library card. You don't need to go through the library's website even to access it, but we do list it as one of our resources because it's free. They do have coverage from 1756 to 1963. And within that time period, they have about 4,000 titles with over 21 million pages. So again, it's not every single newspaper during that time period. There's just, they kind of pick and choose certain titles and certain dates that they cover and feature in this database. Again, they do have a new interface or a new look to their website coming soon. So you can try out either the old version or the new right now. But right now they're only adding new content to the new version of the site. So the old version of the site is going to go away at some point this year. So I'm going to show you only the new version because that's going to be the version you're going to want to use in 2 or 3 months when they completely get rid of the old version. So if you've used the old version before, this is going to look a little different. So again, this link is in your handout, or you can go to Chronicling America and just Google it. So again, this is the new version. So if you go to Chronicling America, it might show you the old version, but it'll give you a little notice at the top of the screen that says, hey, the site's changing, will look soon. Click here to look at the new version. And that's how you would get into the new version if you still come across the old version until they switch it a little bit later this year. So right from the top, you can see they've got some pulled out issues of, hey, you can look at the news from 100 years ago if you wanted to. Or if you click up here to where it says all digitized titles, this is where it's going to allow you to filter down by a certain state or a specific language. So you could do that. You can scroll down to Wisconsin, for example, click on that state, and then apply filter over here so that it knows that it wants you just to search that. So now I can see what Wisconsin newspapers they have at a glance. I can see the titles, how many issues they have. So you can see like right here, this Ashland newspaper, they only have 3 issues. So it might be misleading if you see a large date coverage like this one, 1904 to 1911, but they've only got, you know, just under 400 issues. So you can see what language it's in, things like that. What the first issue is, what the last issue is, things like that at a glance. So you can go in and actually search within that specific newspaper if you want to. It's not translated, unfortunately. So if I search this one, like this German one, unfortunately, it's
I looked
gonna,
at the Danish one, I was like, oh, ancestors.
yeah, it's gonna be in that language, unfortunately. So yeah, you can kind of see like a little information about it, kind of like that newspaper directory I showed you a few minutes ago or earlier. You can kind of see that little overview of what this newspaper was like, all that fun stuff. and then browse digitized images. That's where you would go to actually go into that newspaper. If you start with the title first or that location first. I always love when the internet's a little slow when I'm talking. Takes a little second. It's the downfall of doing it live, is sometimes it decides to take its dear sweet time. Yeah, so now I can see, I can, select certain years if I wanted to. This one only has 1890, it looks like. But any of the blue ones, you can see those are the actual issues that they have for that year. Any of these other ones are grayed out. I can't click on the 2nd of April if I wanted to for that year. It's not available. So if I want to go into it and just browse through it page by page, I can do that. So now I can click into it and I can see it's all in German.
Yeah, how would you, if you have time, use Google to translate it? Do you copy and paste or, and I've never done Google Translate.
Yeah, so sometimes what you can do is you can actually save an image of it and then upload it to Google Translate. Or if it has the full text available where you can just copy and paste it into Google Translate. It's super easy. So yeah, now I can click into this. I can click in and see what it looks like. This kind of looks like an interesting newspaper. It's almost like a newsletter instead of like a newspaper, but just to show you what it looks like. So now you can see that's all in German. Yay! So they have an option right here, image with text. So that's what you would do if you were trying to translate this. And now I can select this and then copy it. And then I can pull up Google Translate in a new tab here. There you go.
Oh, thanks for showing that. That's great.
Yeah, so that's how you easily read a different language in the newspapers. So there is a way to search, of course, without having to go into the actual newspaper here. So if I start back at Chronicling America, if I go back to that all digitized titles, no, that's not what I wanted to do. I want to go to collection items, I'm sorry. If you go to collection items, that's where you can do that advanced search. So you might have to click the little plus button to get to that advanced search first, similar to how we did with the newspaper directory. So the search function looks and works exactly the same. So now in this keyword here, this is where I can put in the name of somebody. If I can just put in a surname here, I can narrow it down by a specific state if I want to. So if I want to just find my Stilp ancestors in Wisconsin, I can select Wisconsin and now do a search. And again, it's going to take its dear sweet time here.
That lovely gentleman that helps you with stuff at the library, he's really sweet.
Yeah.
So if you guys have never gone, then
Yeah,
the
we have
2
great
other sections.
technology help volunteers who will sit with you one-on-one and do stuff like this. If you need a little bit more one-on-one assistance, certain times during the days, we've got volunteers who come and sit with you and will help you navigate this a little better.
The part that they say if you want help, you can sign up.
So that's a walk-in thing. It's kind of first come, first serve.
Okay.
Yep.
But you do have.
If I do have a sign up thing, like if you want me one-on-one, you have to book an appointment. I'm not there all the time, unfortunately.
I thought I saw that and I thought,
Yeah.
really?
So here is our search results. So now you can see they've got kind of the text below and then the actual image up here. So now I can see there's a Joseph Stilp featured in this Eagle River newspaper. So I can click on the actual image of it to be brought into that actual image of that newspaper.
Wow.
And again, you don't have to narrow it down by state. You could narrow it down by date. You could narrow it down even further to a specific county. But again, not everything's digitized through this site. Play around kind of with the search functions. I mean, we could spend probably an hour on each of these sites. I'm just showing you a little tip of the iceberg for each of them. This one's really taking its time. All right, here we are. So now I've got kind of similar functions to how newspapers.com did, where I've got the plus and minus signs. I can zoom in and then kind of click around. And right here, it highlights it right here. Oh, this person was thrown into the canal. Wow, that's rough. Oh, and it actually happened in Appleton, even though this is an Eagle regular newspaper. How cool is that? So I can download the image here if I want to. I can get that image with text like I just showed you, where I can, copy and paste it into Google Translate, or if I wanted to keep a text version of that article, I could do that. They've got PDFs I can download right here. So all kinds of different options for you where I can download that PDF.
Now, if we're at home, it downloads it to ours.
Yeah.
We're at the library, it downloads it.
To the library. So you want to, if you have like a USB drive with you, you can plug it into the computer and then save it on the USB drive or email it to yourself, however you want to save it. But if you're at the library using the library computer, you're going to want to make sure you save it before you log off, because once you log off, it completely wipes out everything. There's no way to just log back in. So right down here is where you download either that PDF or the different JPEG versions, or OCR is that full text version of it.
And this is a Chronicling America.
This is
site?
Chronicling America. So this is what the new Chronicling America site looks like. So if you've used the old one, this is how it's going to look now. It's going to be, I feel like it's, a couple more clicks than maybe the old version used to be, but the search is going to look exactly the same as how the newspaper directory is going to look, which will be easier for if you're using both those functions of the site. Whereas now the old versions, it's very different to use both of them. So any questions about this part of Chronicling America before we move on? They've got lots of great stuff on here. Again, all completely free through Chronicling America, which is the Library of Congress's website. See if we've got some Q&As here. Our articles on newspapers.com always in black and white, even if they have been on a color print page. So if you do find a color print, you can download it as a color print. But if it's black and white and it's been digitized as black and white, you're only going to get black and white. What happened to your ancestor, the Night Man? I'm not sure what happened to him. I didn't really dive into that article. I just happened to search it, and that was the result that I clicked on. All right, so the last one, that's kind of the big four, is Genealogy Bank. So this is another one, unfortunately, that requires a paid subscription. They do offer a 7-day free trial if you want to try it out. You can also do a search for free without signing up, so you can see what results there might be on a certain name of a person you're looking for before you pay for it. But it does require you to get a free account in order to do that search first. If you want to actually look at the actual image though, and look at that result, I mean, it just kind of shows you like a little 1-sentence snapshot of it. You would have to pay to get the actual image and download the actual image then. But on this site, they have over 15,000 big city and small town newspapers with coverage from all of the 50 states. And 95% of all the newspapers that they have on here are exclusive just to this site, meaning you can't find those newspapers on newspapers.com or on Chronicling America. They're only on Genealogy Bank. So the vast majority of stuff on here is only on that site. Again, I've got a link in your handout that gives you a whole list of all the titles, and you can search what titles are available on that site before you decide to pay for a subscription. They have over 311 million obituaries that they've also pulled out of certain newspapers, with certain date coverage of newspapers from going all the way back to 1690. They've got some really great training videos. So I don't have a subscription right now, so I can't show you a live demonstration of how to use it. But in their training center, which is another link in your handout, they've got really great videos on how the site works and how to learn using the site a little bit more effectively. They've got a really great genealogist, Gina Philibert Ortega, who works for Genealogy Bank and does all these training videos. She's awesome, very straightforward, very easy to learn from in order to how to use that site. So if you do end up signing up, I'd definitely check out those videos to get some help. And I'm happy to sit with you too if you do decide to purchase a subscription, because I used to have a subscription. I know how the site works. I don't pay for all of them all the time. That's one of my little tips for you is I like to call it cycle on, cycle off, and I'll get to that in a little bit about how to make the most of your money for these sites. Of course, other than those big four that I just talked about, there's many other free databases we have through the library, or you might have through another local library. Some you actually don't even need your library card to access. So for those who don't live in that area or live in the area, this area, you can check with your own local library. Some libraries also offer cards for people who don't live in that area. You know, example, like I said earlier, in Wisconsin, if you're a Wisconsin resident, you can get a library card to almost every library in the state. Unfortunately, Madison and Milwaukee are the big exceptions. They make you live in that area in order to get a card there. But any other one, you can get, like I said, you can get one for Manitowoc, you can get one for Brown County, you need a Menasha, you can have, you know, a dozen library cards from around Wisconsin. You just have to travel there to actually get the library card. But pair it with doing something else fun or researching in that area. Again, you can have more than one library card. Each library has different databases. And some, again, might also have resources you don't even need a library card to access, like an obituary index or other local history materials that they've put on their website, or that you can just go in there in person and browse without needing to be a member of their library. And that includes even out-of-state resources as well. So even if you're living in Wisconsin and trying to research your ancestors in Iowa, there's going to be Iowa, you know, libraries that have resources like that where you can research it from home as much as you can. So Ancestry Library Edition is one of our big databases. Unfortunately, it's one that you can only access in the library. They do have some limited newspapers and some indexes to some of the newspapers on their collection. Unfortunately, the majority of their newspaper collections are going to be linking you to newspapers.com, which is the paid version of newspapers.com, and it requires a subscription. What you can do is if you come into the library, you can use Ancestry Library Edition in one window, and then pull up newspapers.com Library Edition in another window and use them separately at the library. And anytime you find a little link on Ancestry Library Edition that says newspapers.com, go into that window of your newspapers.com Library Edition without paying for it. Because otherwise, if you click on it in Ancestry Library Edition, it's going to try to get you to pay for newspapers.com because, again, there's a paid version and there's a library edition. So you have to use the library editions in separate windows on the computer. If that sounds confusing for you, again, come in during the tech help hours and they will sit with you and show you how to use those and how to make sure you're not having to pay for all that stuff. They've got all their newspaper collections listed in their card catalog. They've got even some digitized newspapers within the paid edition of Ancestry. So if you have an Ancestry subscription that you use from home, they do have some newspapers that they've digitized there. Unfortunately, on Heritage Quest, which we looked at earlier with that census map tool, they don't have any newspapers on there, and that's, you know, what you can use from home. But again, no newspapers there, so don't even bother looking for newspapers. They do have some newspapers on Fold 3, which is kind of the military genealogy database that we'll talk about a little bit more in June, or not June, July. You can access that from home, but you have to be an Appleton Public Library member. If you signed up with Kaukauna and Kaukauna is your home library, the site's not going to work because Appleton Public Library specifically pays for it, so only Appleton subscribers can access it. So if your home library isn't Appleton, you can come to Appleton and get it changed so that you can use that site. And we'll dive deeper into using that site in July when we talk all about military records, but be aware they do have stuff other than military records on that site, and we'll dive into that a little bit more in July. Another great Wisconsin-specific newspaper database is called the Archive of Wisconsin Newspapers. So unfortunately, only Wisconsin residents can access this. So if you vacation in Florida during the winter when it's cold here, you're not going to be able to access it when you're in Florida. You have to be within the boundary of Wisconsin in order to access it. So there's two different parts of the site. When you first go into the site, it kind of defaults to the current newspapers, which it deems as anything from 2005 to 90 days ago. And it takes that long to get those new editions on there. It's 90 days, so you can't get something from 30 days ago or 60 days ago. It's up to 90 days ago. But there's a little link in the top right corner that says historical newspapers. So if you're looking for historical newspapers that are older than 2005, you have to click on that button first in order to do all the historic newspapers. Otherwise, you're going to think there's nothing on your ancestor there if you're just searching in the current newspapers. So again, make sure you're in that right part of the site before you start to search. They have over 200 daily and weekly newspapers from around the state. So sometimes there are little smaller communities around the state of Wisconsin. Not really any major Wisconsin titles are in there, but lots of, if your ancestor lived in a smaller community, you can definitely find them in here on these newspapers. Each issue is what they call cover to cover. So it's going to be an actual image of the newspaper where you can download a PDF of it or download an image file of it. And you don't just get that like text typing on the screen, it's an actual image of the newspaper. They've got some really great links on how to use the site. And they also have a newspaper title list that they list what newspapers they specifically have. So this is what I was talking about. There's that button that says search historical newspapers. So that's what you're going to want to click on in order to search those historical newspapers. And then right up here is where they have a video presentation of how to search on the site, as well as a link to the different newspapers they have in there. So again, these are kind of smaller town newspapers in here. So we're kind of running short on time, so I'm going to skip a demonstration, but if you guys want to hang out later at the end, I can go back and do a demonstration if you really want me to. There's also some newspapers within Family Search. So I personally always use the card catalog and then narrow down to obituaries. That's where you're going to find a lot of the collections that have been, digitized on Family Search, or a lot of obituaries. You're not really going to find a whole lot of other digitized newspapers. We're going to find other articles like a biography or anything like that. They specifically are looking for like obituaries and digitizing those. So they've got like 50 some results on different obituary collections that you would type in there. We've also got Newspaper Source Plus. So this is what they call full text. So you're not going to get an actual image of the newspaper. It's just the words on the page. You're just going to be able to copy and paste the words on the page in order to save that newspaper article. It's not going to give you, if there was a picture involved with it, it's not going to give you an actual image of the newspaper. But this database includes 500 or nearly 500 major US newspapers and more than 600 international newspapers. So they're kind of the major newspapers like USA Today, the Washington Post, the Philadelphia Inquirer, Star Tribune, Toronto Star, et cetera, et cetera. All the date coverage is going to vary depending on what title you're looking at. So some go back to the 1960s, some might only go back to the 1980s or 1990s. It's going to vary depending on what title you're looking at. So when you go into the site, it's going to kind of look like this. So right in this main search bar, that's where you would type a keyword, like the name of your ancestor. In those quotation marks, if you're searching a first name and last name, that's where you're going to type it. But if you want to look and see, hey, do they even have the newspaper title I'm looking for? There's options over here on the left side. One says publications. So that's where you're going to click on publications, and it's going to bring up a separate little search bar that you would type in the name of that newspaper first in order to see, do they even have it in this database before I even bother searching? Or again, you can search just by the name of your ancestor to see, if you don't want to narrow it down by a certain newspaper title, you just want to search and see if they're in anything on there, you can start at that main search bar there. And again, because of time, I'm not going to do a live demonstration, but at the end, if anybody wants to stick around and wants me to do a live demonstration of any of these, I'm happy to do it. Just trying to maximize our time here so I don't keep you here for 3 hours. Our next one is called US News Stream. So again, this one's full text where you're not going to get an actual image of the newspaper, but it has some current as well as some historical newspapers from the United States dating all the way back to the 1980s for certain titles. So again, these are kind of more major newspapers like New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Boston Globe, Chicago Tribune, et cetera, et cetera. They've got some Gannett titles, which are kind of like a big conglomerate of newspapers So they own the Post Crescent, they own the Green Bay Press Gazette. So you can get from 1999 to today of the Post Crescent on here. Unfortunately, it doesn't go any further back for that specific newspaper, but some of the other newspapers you might get back to the 1980s. And again, the date coverage is going to vary by title. So just like the Newspaper Source Plus database, they've got these two separate search bars. So the main search bar, when you first log into that database, is where you can enter that search term of your ancestor's name or an address or whatever keyword search you wanted to throw in there. If you wanted to narrow down by a specific newspaper title first, that's where you're going to select publications first, and then you can type in Post Crescent or Green Bay Press Gazette, and then search just within that newspaper if you wanted to. And again, I can do a live demonstration at the end if anybody wants to hang around and see what that looks like. We've also got what's called Internet Archive. So this is a completely free site to use. Anybody can use it from home. You can even just Google Internet Archive and it will pop up. It includes various digitized newspapers, including some Post Crescent, which is our local newspaper. Again, the coverage is going to vary. It's not complete. So for example, Post Crescent, they have some issues from 1860 to 1972. They have about 10,000 issues, but it's not a complete run from that time period. They also have more than just newspapers on this website. So they've got digitized books or magazines or videos. They've got a little bit of everything on here. What you can do is you can do a keyword search. So there's an option, and I'll show you in just a second. It says search text contents. So you kind of find it hidden below the search bar. That means that's where you're going to click on in order to search your ancestor's name within what you're looking at first, or within all the stuff. You want to search text contents because it's going to search anything that's within something that's been digitized. The other option in there, it's called a metadata search. So that's when you're searching for a specific title or a specific author of a specific book or a specific newspaper, for example. It's kind of like the information you would find in a library catalog record. So that's the main difference between those two searches, that you want to make sure you're in the right search. If you click on metadata search and put in your ancestor's name, you're probably not going to get results. So you want to make sure you're doing the text contents option. If you go into our library's website, I have a direct link into the Post Crescent digitized stuff in there. But if you want to search anything in Internet Archive, if you just go to Google and type in Internet Archive, or archive.org is their website. So this is what it looks like, and I'm going to do, oh, I was going to do a live demonstration here. I guess I didn't put the link in there. It's archive.org. So it's going to ask you first at the top, they say, we need money in order to continue running the site, but you don't have to pay. So right here is the main search bar. So this is what I was talking about when I said the metadata option or the text content. So again, that's where you would decide if I'm searching the metadata one, that's where I'm putting the newspaper name in. So I can type in Post Crescent, or if I wanted to type in my ancestor's name, I'd make sure to select that second option first. So now it's going to show me stuff that's related to Post Crescent, and I can see there's certain issues here. Or I can just click on where it says this newspaper archive to go within all of the digitized Post Crescents. And now you can see again, I've got another search bar, but I want to select that search text content. So now it knows to search within these newspapers for my ancestor's name. So this is where I would type in that ancestor's name and then click search. So now I can see there's a little kind of snapshot preview of what it is. And then in order to get into it, I would just click on the actual image and it's going to bring me right into there. And I can use the zoom in, zoom out down here to zoom in and look at that actual article. So now I can see one of those looking back columns on 100 years ago. If I scroll down a little bit, I can see there's options to download it here. So I can download a PDF of it or a full text. That's just going to give me the words of the article. So I really want a PDF of it, is what I would recommend. That'll give me the actual image of this newspaper then. Any questions on that before we move on? All right. We also have a really great resource through the library that's an obituary index of Appleton area ancestors. So if you have Appleton area ancestors, we as librarians created this whole database for you to try to find their obituary a little easier. So you can search any obituary, death notice, and news story related to death that appeared in the Post-Crescent. And eventually we're going to add those historic ones that were the precursor to Post-Crescent. You can search by name, you can search by date, or a range of dates. This is not a complete index. It's something we continually are working on to add additional entries. So of course, we're indexing both the current versions as well as historic ones. And you can see the website for what dates are included in this index. And what you do is you use the information from this index to then come to the library to figure out what page and what date that newspaper is and where that obituary is. So you can either get it in the library, or we have an option where you can request it right there in the index, and then we'll email you a copy without you even having to come into the library. And it's completely free of charge, and usually within a day or a week, we have sent it to you. So it's not too long of a wait. So I'll show you quickly how that looks and how it works. So what you do is you go to apl.org. If you just hover over this e-library, it's actually one of our popular databases. So we have a link right directly to it. So that's where you would click to go right into it. Or you can find it through our genealogy stuff as well. So if you scroll down first, you can see what dates are included in it. So it's got quite a lot of coverage in here, but not complete, unfortunately. And then it's kind of got some years that we have some records on, but we're continually working on. So these are hopefully going to be complete soon, but it's obviously really time consuming to go to every page and look through every page to find a death and then add it to the index. But right up here is where you would search. So you put in a last name, a first name, you can put in a maiden name, or search by a specific date or a date range. So for example, if your ancestor's name was misspelled, you might want to do a date or date range if you don't find them. So I'm just going to put in last name, and you can click submit. And then it's going to give you a snapshot overview of the results. So some of them you can see are blank on their first name, because at certain times, unfortunately, women were not named by their first name. They were named by their husband's name. Yeah.
If you're searching for an individual and you hope, you really don't know exactly how they spell their name, like Ben Shovel. Yeah. And you put in the best you know, or what you think, will it come up with things that are like it, or only?
No, you have to do a specific search of how it's spelled in the newspaper. So that's why we put the option of putting a date in there. So like if you know what date they died, or a range, like, oh, I know they died within this month in 1981, you can search the whole month and then scroll through those results. Or try searching that name a couple different spellings that you know of. So this, again, kind of gives you a little snapshot of what it looks like. Anytime you see a blank, it's either because it didn't include that information in the actual entry. So if you want to learn a little bit more about somebody, what you do is you just click on view details. And it's going to give you a little bit more than that kind of just overview gives you. So it might give you information like their cemetery or their spouse or where they were born, things like that. And then up here is where you'd see the newspaper, the date, and the page of where I could come into the library and get that on microfilm. Or if you didn't want to come to the library or you don't live near Appleton, you can click request a copy. And then what you do is you'd fill in your name, phone number, and email address, and then we will email it to you, like I said, within usually a few days, sometimes a week if we're on vacation a little bit, or have a lot of requests at once, but this is completely free for you to then get an emailed copy of this obituary.
That will be your PDF.
So either a PDF or an image file, yes. So that's just for Appleton, unfortunately. So if, or Appleton area, if it was in the Appleton Post-Crescent and they, we're from Neenah or from Kaukauna, of course they're going to be in here. So any obituary is going to be in here if it's a local death. If it's some random person from Florida, you know, we're not gonna include them unless they had an actual obituary in our newspaper because they had some link to the local area.
Do you think that, Dale Medina area is a local to Appleton?
It should be.
That would be a newspaper.
Don't want to go back into that. Thankfully, we aren't the only library that has an obituary index. So some libraries even index things other than obituaries. So I know Winnifox, which is kind of Nina Menasha, Oshkosh area, they have this whole vitals index. That's a separate site that they have obituaries, funeral notices for certain counties, and they've got births in here and marriages in here. They've got lots of really great stuff. So again, I can search for that and click on and type in my ancestor's name and then see all these different results for, you know, the Nina newspapers, the Oshkosh newspapers, and then again, see what dates and what pages. And they even also have a request here as well, where you can do mail or email. I'm trying to remember if they charge for this or not. There is no cost if you do an email version, but limit your request to 5 at a time until you get your prior request fulfilled. So again, it's kind of as staff and volunteer have time, but this is a great Fox Cities resource for you as well. And of course, other local libraries where your ancestors lived might have similar indexes like that. So always look into the local libraries in that area. Be sure to search in that geographic area of that newspaper you're searching. So again, you know, Google libraries near that city, that state, like I showed you earlier. And don't forget about state libraries or genealogy societies or historical societies. They might also have indexes. So just like we Googled for the Peoria County libraries, we can Google Illinois State Library and get results, and then, you know, log into their databases, or if they're accessible to us, or give them a call or see what resources they have available for free. Or I can Google something like Illinois Genealogy Society and then see, you know, again, I can click into their website and then see what resources they might have, or learn how I can research from a distance through those states. So again, it works for every state. You just have to kind of play with Google a little bit and do those searches. If a library has an index like we do, they're likely to provide copies of those newspaper articles or those obituaries. Sometimes they might be free, like we don't charge anything. Sometimes they might charge a small fee, like, you know, $2 or $5. Sometimes they might ask for a larger donation. Like I've, you know, gone through libraries that have wanted $20 or $25. So, you know, it can add up pretty quick. So be sure to know if there's a cost and what the cost is associated before you click submit. You know, or some will say it's free, but we suggest a donation. So you kind of get to choose the amount that you would like to donate if you would like to donate. Of course, if you're able to visit that location, you can, you know, look them up and pay to print them or save them to a USB or email them to yourself through the microfilm as well.
You bring a USB into the Appleton Public Library. Does it have to be checked for viruses? No. Okay.
And again, you can even get microfilm from the Wisconsin Historical Society and get it sent here to Appleton, where, you know, all you need to do is know kind of what date you're looking for, what newspaper, and then we will try to get it from the Wisconsin Historical Society if they have it, and then you can browse that microfilm at the library. And again, that's completely free. Again, some local newspapers have also been digitized and are hosted on other websites. So other than the ones I've already showed you, certain libraries have websites, certain archives, certain genealogy societies or historical societies. So like there's Digitize Oconto County, which is a whole you know, website all about Oconto County newspapers where you can search this site. They've got all these newspapers digitized and different date coverage where you can you know, completely use it for free. There's a Washington State one that I found that all you have to do is kind of Google search, you know, the names of you know, the state or the county where you're researching, and then you can find these free resources where you can again research these for free from home. Some may be free, some you may need a library card or to live in that area to search. So again, it's going to vary depending on what area you're researching. So I can't cover every single resource there is for every single state or every country, or we would be here all week. So you're gonna have to use Google a little bit. There's also a couple other ones I just wanted to briefly tell you about. So there's old news from MyHeritage. So this is something that they just released. You do have to be a subscriber to MyHeritage, but you can search for free to see if there's any results there. But you would need to then pay to have a subscription in order to get those or to find those articles on a different website that might be available for free or might have a paid subscription tied to it. But this is something that they just released a couple months ago through MyHeritage. They've also got this great site called Fulton History Newspapers, where they have over 57 million newspapers from the United States and Canada. A lot are from New York State, since this is where this person's based. It's not really the easiest site to use, but they do have it available for free. And there's a couple like training videos that you can watch to learn how to use the site a little bit better as well. So you can see more information on your handout about that. Google used to have a news archive that they used to publish a lot of really cool historic stuff regularly. Unfortunately, they aren't adding anything more to it, but you can still access all the stuff that's already been put on there from there. So again, I've got that link in your handout, and you can see all these newspapers and narrow it down by newspaper date. It covers all different newspapers from all around the world. So all you would have to do is find that newspaper, click into it, and now you can see all these digitized images and then click into it and be able to browse and search within and play around with it. Then there's a great site called the Ancestor Hunt where they have a lot of research links. So they'll link you to other resources by state or by like special collections that they might have, or by different international countries as well. They have a lot more than just newspapers on here, but that's only the only thing I'm going to show you through that site today. So if you just Google the Ancestor Hunt or go to theancestorhunt.com, up here in the upper right corner, they have resources. So you can see they've got obituaries, yearbooks, births, cemetery, church, all kinds of different stuff in here. They do sometimes have some pop-ups that you got to X out of. But you can see the third option is newspaper link. So that's the one you're going to want to click on. Again, they've got some ads that pop up because it's a free site. They need to be able to pay for keeping the site up. So that's the kind of annoying thing, is you got to close out of those ads. But if you scroll down, you can see they've got links for every single state in the United States. So you can click on whatever state you're researching in, and then it will give you links for that specific state. So they'll show you all these free sites, like Chronicling America. You can link into the Illinois ones. It will show you exactly which ones are included in here. And you can click right into any of those instead of trying to search within Chronicling America. They've got those Google News Archive ones. They've got a link to this Illinois digital newspaper collection and all these newspapers that are listed within it. So again, these are all free sites that they have linked for you to see what newspapers. And you can see there are a lot. There's even this whole University of Illinois Farm, Field, and Fireside collection. That's if you have an Illinois farmer or Illinois Civil War newspapers. And then they've got some county resources or library resources after that. So definitely explore to see more stuff than what we can cover today for your specific state. They've also got, if we go back to that whole listing, if you scroll down past all the United States, they've got special US collections like African American ones, German ones, French ones, et cetera, et cetera. Then they've got the Canadian ones. Then they've got Europe ones. So if you're like, hey, I need German newspapers, here we go, right here. These are going to be links to all these German ones. So again, use it for all the states, all the countries. So at this point, you might be wondering, well, which newspaper site's best? Because you've shown me about 100 so far. Well, it depends where you're going to be researching. The best site for you is going to be different than the best site for me, or the best site for you, the best site for you. It all depends on where you're researching and what's been digitized. So like I showed earlier, Genealogy Bank has 90%, 95% of their collections just available on that site. So if you're searching for a Milwaukee newspaper, I know it's on Genealogy Bank. Well, I might not need Milwaukee newspaper. I might need newspapers.com. That might be a better site for me. So unfortunately, each site includes different newspapers. There might be some overlap in coverage. But depending on what location and time period you need to be researching and where that newspaper is accessible, it's going to be the best site for you, or you might need to use a combination of all of them at certain times. I've kind of used all of these sites at one time or another because they all have various pros and cons, or like I said earlier, I kind of cycle on, cycle off. So what that means is for 6 months, I might have a newspapers.com paid subscription, and then I cancel it. And then for the next 6 months, I'll sign up for Genealogy Bank and use all those resources on there. And then I'll cancel that after 6 months. And then maybe I'll do a month of newspaper archive and kind of, play with the different ones. So I'm not paying for all 4 of them at once or all 5 newspaper subscriptions at once. There's only so limited amounts that you want to spend on newspaper research or on genealogy research. So kind of, use the free versions, use those free access weekends that come up, use those free trials, start a list of stuff that hey, I know I can get this on Newspaper Archive. So right now, when I don't have a Newspaper Archive subscription, I have a list of stuff that when I do have a Newspaper Archive subscription, I can then look up these newspapers, look up these articles that I wanted to. Or again, you can always try to interlibrary loan that microfilm for free to the Appleton Library, or use all the other free versions of all the sites that I just showed you on the Ancestor Hunt, or the free versions that you can get through the library if you're able to. Again, you can always check the listings of what newspapers are included in these different sites before you purchase a subscription, which is really helpful to make sure they actually have the newspaper you're looking for before you shell out the $50 or the $70 for it. I've got a bunch of search tips for you for searching these online newspapers, because as great as it is to put in your ancestor's name and find stuff, sometimes you need to do a little bit more than that to find all the things. So if you're lucky, these newspapers are going to be digitized. You can search for your ancestor by name and get a bunch of results, but you can also search by other keywords to pull up more results. So these newspaper sites rely on what's called OCR. So this is called optical character recognition. You don't really need to know that, but I'm just kind of explaining the back end of it and why certain searches don't always pop up. So it's basically a computer is reading what it thinks the newspaper says and returning those results for you. Thankfully, this has gotten a little bit better as technology has advanced, but some of the old newspapers, they might be blurry. So a computer might have difficulty reading it, and then you're not going to get an actual search result for it because it might be a little blurry. So for example, this is what on the left-hand side, OCR thinks it's reading, and then this is the original newspaper image. So you can see if I put in the name Vincent Johnson, over here, it doesn't recognize Vincent. It can't recognize that V and the I and the N at the beginning of that word. So if I typed in Vincent Johnson, I would not get this newspaper result because OCR doesn't recognize that name is Vincent. So unfortunately, sometimes you get some gobbledygook. It looks like it's a different language. So we need to be a little creative on how we're searching these newspaper sites in order to make sure we're actually finding our ancestor in all of the newspaper articles we want to. So I always recommend don't just search by a name, of course, search by a name, but there's also other ways you can search for your ancestor. So remember last month I talked about you need to search 5, 6, 7 different ways sometimes in order to find all of the stuff. Well, it's more like 10 or 20 different ways for newspapers. So if you really want to get all of the things, you got to search a lot and try a different search every single time. So I always try searching other stuff like their address or a date, like their birth date or their marriage date, or other unique things about them, like, what Civil War regiment they fought in, or what their occupation or their company that they worked for was. You can also browse page by page. You can go right into the post-crescent and right into a specific date and go page by page on certain sites, for example. Or like if you know that they died on September 1st of 1922, you can start at September 1st and then browse through all the pages and see if you can find them, go to September 2nd, et cetera, and see anything if you're not able to find them through those keyword searches. I've also got a ton of different ways that I search. These are just a few of the options. So like I said, 10 to 20 different ways. So I search first name, middle name, last name. I search last name, first name. I search with a middle initial, without a middle initial. The first initial of the first name with the last name. An initial for the first and the middle name, a shortened first name, because sometimes George is GEO or William is WM. So I add a middle name in their last name because sometimes people just went by their middle name and not their first name. I put in nicknames. I search for their spouse's name. I search for their surname only. I search, which of course works really well with names that aren't common, but if you've got a last name like Johnson or Smith or Brown, it's gonna take you forever. But again, you can use those filters like that location, those dates to give you a more narrowed search, to only search within that time period where you know your ancestor is and within that location. And of course, there's gonna be different misspellings of that name or typos, like Jones could be without the S, or it could be JOENS. Because, you know, typos happen all the time. There's maybe even an Americanized name or an English version of a name, like Schwartz is German, so it's black in English. Or they might have dropped a prefix, like if the name's O'Connell, it could just be indexed or in the newspaper as Connell. Maybe they dropped off that O and that apostrophe. Try searching by the names of other people that are related to them, like their parents, their mother's maiden name, their spouses, their children, their siblings, their aunts, their uncles. That 5-generation photo I mentioned earlier, I found that by searching the name of the sister of my ancestor, not by the name of my 3rd great grandmother who was in there, because her name was under her husband's name and it was misspelled very badly. So you got to get creative with your searches and it'll pay off, I can guarantee. So again, these are just some of the options. I would try all of them. Any questions at this point before we dive into how to search stuff offline? Because again, not everything is online. All right, so offsite stuff. So again, if I haven't said it enough, not all the stuff is online. This means you have to search the old-fashioned way, page by page on microfilm. This is so fun. It takes hours and hours off your life. So what do is you locate that microfilm archive of that newspaper through that library or through that archive or genealogy society or historical society. So again, like I showed you earlier, you can use WorldCat or Google searches to find a certain library in that area that you're looking for and find that newspaper in that library. Once you have that name of that library or whoever has those newspaper archives, you can browse their website, browse their catalog to learn what years they have, to make sure they have those years of that newspaper that you're looking for. You can figure out either by going through their website or by calling them or calling us at the local library and getting their phone number, or getting their phone number quickly off their website, of course, because you always want to verify what you find online. Let's see, if you want to or are able to, you can even go to the library to access that microfilm. Of course, all libraries have different equipment. Some have really fancy, newer microfilm machines. Some have very old ones that are like blurry all the time and hard to read and hard to use, like some you have to like hand crank them yet. Like your arm gets really tired after doing that a few times. Some have microfiche, which are like these little cards that you put in, and I always put them in the wrong way. And it's like, then you gotta flip them around and try to figure it out. So every library, you're gonna have to use how to use their microfilm machine every single time. Some of the smaller libraries don't even have a microfilm machine, or it might be part of a library system where you wanna find that branch that has the microfilm. So it's usually, again, that central branch, that main branch, that downtown branch usually. And again, be sure to call in advance and make sure that they actually have the microfilm. They actually have a microfilm machine that they can read it. You don't want to waste a trip there before you confirm that stuff. Even when you're searching that microfilm, some of the stuff you find might be so short, like it might just be a sentence or two, that you might accidentally skim over it, because you can't just type in a keyword search on a microfilm machine and get those results like we did on all these newspaper sites. So especially these older newspapers, it's a little harder to find stuff, but you know, sometimes that's our only option, unfortunately. Sometimes you might even get multiple news items under one headline. So you might have, one headline and then 4 or 5 different paragraphs, and they might be different news stories all within just one headline. So sometimes even just skimming the headlines, you're gonna miss stuff. So you want to also make sure you're getting the full article. If you actually find something that's relevant to your ancestor, sometimes they cut off a certain article and then continue it on page 3 or page 4 or a different column. So before you leave the library, make sure you have the whole thing and don't just get half the article. If you don't live close to a library that has that microfilm or you can't travel to it, again, there's going to be some other options you could explore for getting that obituary or getting that article. You usually have to have an approximate date. So like the date of death, for example, or that anniversary date where you're looking for that anniversary article on them. Again, Wisconsin Historical Society Library in Madison, they have newspapers for all over the United States. I always recommend getting a research trip in there because it's a beautiful library. It's amazing. They have so many more things other than microfilm. Make sure you're using their catalog, writing down that film number or the call number of any things that you want to look at before you go there so that you're prepared. But they also do requests. They will look up things, but it's $15 a request for each article. So it's very expensive if you decide to do it that way, which is why I recommend just interlibrary loaning the microfilm up to Appleton. And that is completely free, or you can, again, do it to your local library if you don't live in the Appleton area, as long as that library has a microfilm machine. Because if they don't have a microfilm machine, then you're not going to be able to look at it. So they usually don't let those outside of the library. So you need to make sure you're interlibrary loaning it to a place that you can look at it. You can also call, write, or email to that library or that location that would have it. Ask them about research. So again, some of them are free, some of them charge. It could be $5 or it could be $50. So everywhere gets to set their own fees and how much they charge. Some do it based on an hourly basis. Some do it per article charge. Some work with a local genealogy or historical society where they're volunteers. So it might be a little bit of a wait to get those articles that you're looking for. Or again, request to interlibrary loan that library, that microfilm through the library. And again, we limit to 5 requests at a time, but makes it manageable for you that you're not spending all day at the library looking through 5 rolls of microfilm. Remember, some of them might have indexes, like I showed you our library's obituary index. Some of them might be online and searchable for free without needing a library card to that library. But some of them also have offline indexes where they're book form. So you can maybe call that library and ask them if they have any sort of index. And if they have an index and it's in book form at the library and you can't get there, maybe they'll look up and see that name of that person that you're looking for and then be able to get you a specific article that was in the index. Again, maybe for free, maybe not. It's going to vary everywhere. A couple tips for you. This works for both the electronic ones and the non-electronic ones. If there's a daily paper and a weekly paper in the same area, I want you to check both because the daily version and the weekly version might have different information in it, believe it or not. Sometimes also if there's multiple newspapers in the same city and they have more than one newspaper, check all of the newspapers. Or look in newspapers around the area. So an obituary could be in Appleton, it could be in Green Bay, it could be in the Neenah Menasha, and all 3 of them could be different obituaries. So you might get more information by looking at all of the different newspapers available. And again, check in those communities where they lived elsewhere during their lives or where their immediate family lived. So maybe they died in California, but their death was reported in Wisconsin where they were born and spent the majority of their life. Sometimes you might get a more detailed obituary where they died, and then just a brief mention in their hometown newspaper, or it could be the exact opposite, where you just get a brief mention in that hometown newspaper and a longer one where they actually died. Don't just stop searching when you find that obituary. Check that newspaper for a few days. Maybe they changed or corrected that obituary and added some additional information. Or maybe there's further details or a funeral report on who attended from out of town, which will help link you to families. Like that's an easy way to find the married names of all the kids or the brothers and sisters, things like that. Unfortunately for obituaries, the amount of detail is never consistent, ever. You might get really detailed obituaries, or you might get really, really short ones that are 1 or 2 sentences. It's going to be a mixed bag of everything. It doesn't matter on what time period or why. It just is what it is. The very early obituaries, though, tend to be 1 or 2 lines, unless they were somebody more prominent and well-known in that area. Generally, kind of in that mid to late 19th century is when we get to see the more obituaries and death notices for us regular people. But sometimes they're not as detailed either. The more detailed obituaries that we kind of think of nowadays kind of started in those 1930s, 1940s time period, but you still might get lucky and find a more detailed obituary before that time period. It really just depends. Larger cities, you might only get a small mention because those usually had to be paid for, and those were more expensive in those really big newspapers like the Chicago Tribune, for example, or the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. You know, you might get like a little paragraph, unless they were kind of prominent or wealthy, who paid to have a longer obituary. And like I mentioned earlier, it's really costly to print an obituary in the newspapers. So people sometimes don't even have an obituary anymore, or it's just a few lines and it's directing you to a full obituary through the funeral home, for example. So really, it's kind of unclear for us genealogists what that's going to look like going forward for future genealogists. Are they being preserved in any way, or in 10 years, is that obituary that's from 2024 going to be gone? So what I always recommend when you find those is to print them out or save them as a PDF file. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So my grandpa's sister had her obituary through the funeral home's website. Some of the funeral home websites will have a printer-friendly version, so you can see like a little printer icon, or it might say something like printer-friendly. So I always recommend clicking on that first, because then it's going to kind of cut out all the other garbage from those other areas of the site, and it looks very nice and neat here. And then, depending on what browser you're using, like if you're using Google Chrome or Firefox or whatever browser, you just have to figure out how to print. So usually on a PC, you can click Control and the letter P. So bring up printer icon then. And so under here, where it asks me the name of my printer, instead of printing it, there's an option that says Save as PDF. And then what I can do is I can click Save. And now it's going to save it as a PDF on my computer. And so now I can pull up that PDF in my files here. So now it looks exactly like that website. And that's her obituary. Now I can print that if I wanted to, or just save it in my electronic files. So I just want to show you quickly, if I had printed it from here, what it looks like. And again, I can do that Control P and print it that way, but it kind of shows you a preview over here where you can kind of get this like weird stuff on the side, and you actually see it actually cuts off part of her obituary if I did it that way. So that's why I always look for that printer-friendly version before I try to print it or save it, because it looks a lot nicer that way than it did that way. Any questions about doing that? Don't be afraid to check those foreign language newspapers. Again, it's a lot easier to translate than you think. I showed you Google Translate and how you can easily copy and paste certain things, or maybe you might have to retype it if it's one that you can't easily copy and paste, like you can't easily copy paste from microfilm, or if you got a printed one from somewhere, you can't just copy and paste it, you might need to type it in there. But these ones, they could list the hometown of your ancestor, especially if they were born back in that old country. So, you know, it might list that area in Germany where your family's from. That could open up all of the research then in Germany for that specific area. So you're not trying to find that needle in the haystack. Again, remember the information that you find in those obituaries or from a newspaper article, you want to follow up, see what other records and other sources you can find to prove that information. Because again, they don't write their own obituary. So maybe you can get that obituary and then use that information to go find their birth record, find their marriage record, find their death certificate, find the funeral home records, go to the cemetery where they're buried and get those cemetery records. So there's all these other avenues of research that you need to do then to get more sources for the information you find in there. Pay attention to the church affiliation that they have listed in their obituary. Or maybe it's mentioned in some other news article about they were part of the church bake sale or something, or some sort of involvement in the church. Then you can follow up with that church and see what records they might have for your ancestor. And we're going to talk all about church records this summer in August. So lots of resources that are great in church records that can help you fill in blanks for your ancestor. There's a couple weird words you might find in articles or obituaries, like there's INST. It stands for instant. It means that month. Or you might see ULT, ULT. That means the previous month. It's Latin. I don't know why newspapers like to confuse us like that. But you might see something like Harry Jones died 21 INST. That means he died the 21st of that month. So if you see something weird like that, that's what that means. Don't forget to cite your sources. You want to write down that name of that newspaper, that location where you got it from, or that location where that newspaper is printed, the date of that newspaper, the page number. So I've got a little citation template for you that I threw in your handout for you, but essentially you're writing out, that article title, where it came from, that date, that page, the column number, if it's a digital image or if it's microfilm or what it is, where you got it from, when you got it from, or what date you got it from, stuff like that. You can even use these newspaper sites that have digital newspapers to try to reverse search any clippings you might have. So maybe you inherited a bunch of clippings of newspapers from your grandma or your mom that you have no dates or newspapers attached to. You have no clue where this obituary came from. You can search that person's name in these obituary sites or these newspaper sites and find out what newspaper and what date it came from and what page, so that you can properly cite those sources then. So I do that all the time. If I find random newspaper clippings in my family files, like, oh, that's when the tornado hit the house. Okay, now I can find it in the newspapers.com, for example. I've got a great link to this YouTube session we did on newspapers back in 2020. So this is going to show you the old Chronicling America. So just be aware, if you do watch this, she's got some great tips and tricks. She also shows you how to use that Archive of Wisconsin newspapers and a couple other newspaper sites that we talked about. But any of the Chronicling America stuff is going to be the old version of the site that's going away sometime soon. So if you do watch that video, just be aware of that. There's a link to it on our YouTube channel. This is also a great book that we have at the library. If you want to learn more about researching in historic newspapers, it goes really in depth with how to research in newspapers, more than what I can cover in an hour and a half, almost 2 hours. They've got chapters on netnewspapers.com, on Genealogy Bank, gives you really great listings of additional newspaper resources to check out. Again, we've got this at the library. You can check it out for free and browse it. That's what I've got for you. So our next section is going to be here, Tuesday, May 28th. And we're going to do immigration and naturalization records. So trying to figure out when exactly your ancestors came to America, how they came to America, and if they became a US citizen, what the process was of doing that. In the meantime, we have our next Find Your Ancestors session through the library. It's on Zoom. It's going to be all about some mysterious codes you might find on those passenger and immigration lists and what those codes mean and how they can help your research. So be sure to join us for that. That's what I got for you. So I'm happy to take any additional questions. And I wish you all luck in finding all the cool stuff in newspapers, because you can spend all your genealogy research time in newspapers and not find everything.
I found a lot of things that I'm gonna try, but as long as I'm here, I'm gonna ask you questions. Have you found any kind of interest in the answers to your research in early 1800s of North Carolina?
I don't have any ancestors in that area, no, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm gonna be looking for that.
But I would start with Family Search Wiki. So Family Search Wiki, I don't know if you've attended our other sessions where we talked about the Family Search Wiki, but if you just go to familysearch.org/wiki, you can type in any location and get information on that location. So right here, you could type in North Carolina. And there's an option that's going to walk you through all the different resources in North Carolina. All these blue links you can click on, gives you maps, all these stuff you can click on if you're looking for specific things like, oh, I really want church records in North Carolina, or I really want military records. You can dive in, and each of these are additional pages where you can learn more, and it's going to link you to all these resources. There's different county links, so if you know they are in a specific county, you can dive into those. So this is kind of where I would start, and it links you to resources that you can find in Family Search as well as other resources.
So that's on the wiki.
This is the Family Search Wiki.
Family search.
So you can do this for any location, even international countries.
Big, by ancestry and all that kind of stuff, and it's about to expire.
Mhm.
If I were to, as you say,
Cycle on, cycle off. Yep.
cycle on, cycle off, am I limited into paper records, or let's say I were to go to the library and use.
Yeah, so we have the library edition, which has lots of the same stuff that you can get on Ancestry, the paid edition. There's also Heritage Quest, which is the Ancestry version you can use from home essentially.
Okay,
So they've got like the census records on there, lots of other resources for free.
But my family tree it gets started.
Your family's tree still stays, even if you cancel your Ancestry subscription, you can still make updates on there, even if you have a free or not paid version of ancestry.com. You can still access your tree. You just can't pull up, like if you attach the 1940 census to somebody and go to click on it, it's gonna say, hey, you owe us money in order to look at that. So unless you downloaded a copy or printed a copy of those resources that you attach to your tree, you can't look at those unless you have a paid subscription at that time, or come look at those resources again at the library for free.
Okay, thanks.
Are those attachments still on there though?
They will still be there. So if in 10 years you go back to Ancestry, or 2 years, you can still log in just as long as you remember your stuff or can reset your password. All of your stuff is still there, as long as you don't delete your tree.
But once you cancel your subscription, you're no longer able to view the attachments you
Correct.
made.
So that's why whenever I find anything on Ancestry, when I have a paid subscription, I download a copy of it. So when I stop paying for it for 6 months or a year, I can still go into my digital files and find that 1940 census or that birth record that I saved.
Some of you might have a better tip for ancestry.com for subscription payments. I found that the best deal, I've been doing this for several years now, is doing the guest gifts first subscription.
Yep.
And the best prices are either on Black Friday
Yep.
or Cyber Monday.
Yep. And so usually what you can do too on that Black Friday or Cyber Monday, like they usually have it for like a week or so, and you could set that to start like in February if you wanted to. And you can gift yourself a membership. So,
I do that during the winter when
Yep.
I'm doing less
Yep.
outside.
or usually if you cancel your subscription, like in a few weeks, they'll email you, hey, we're gonna give you 20% off or 30% off or 50% off sometimes. So I personally never pay for Ancestry unless it's 50% off. So
I've been off now for a few years.
Yeah.
So I only have been getting 40% off.
yeah, sometimes they might be changing it. So yeah, but
So you're
when I
saying
renewed, it was 50%
I
off.
should
so.
just not automatically renew mine?
Yeah, I never
So
automatically
I
renew.
come
40%, 50%,
Yeah.
a lot less money.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I know, I've been paying for it.
And you know, in the meantime, when you don't have a subscription, come use those free resources or really focus in on those newspaper databases or, you know, offsite research in that meantime. So, yeah. I've got a whole video on our YouTube channel that talks all about ancestry.com, and I offer some of those kind of tips and tricks in it too. So if you go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/APLREF, you'll see I've got a whole playlist. And we've got all of our genealogy series for seniors is in here, so those previous videos. But if you scroll down to the Find Your Ancestors series, or I've got some database trainings here where I've linked certain things. So any of these, you can find more genealogy resources in here. So these are some of our past sessions. I've got a whole overview of Family Search if you're not super familiar with that. We've got other different resources that we've covered the last few years. So there's this one, Getting the Most Out of Ancestry.com, where I'm walking you through, and it works with both the library edition and the paid edition. And I give you some tips and tricks on how I save money, how to, you know, do certain searches and how to make it so that you're using the site more effectively. So I recommend going to view that. So
And I'm curious, if you went through the Appleton Public Library and try, would they be able to do any research within our tree?
So you'd have to have the library edition in a window and then pull up the ancestry.com outside of the library and just log into your account, and you'd still be able to update your tree. What you could do is you can even download from the library edition and then upload it to your tree in Ancestry. Don't tell the people at Ancestry I told you that. But yeah, you can do that.
It's a lot of monkey around.
I show you how to do that in my Ancestry video of how to download it from somewhere and then upload it to your tree. Yeah, but you know, it's expensive. You can't, pay for it all the time. So
I
it's,
use the app a lot, anybody knows about that app, I just, use it all the time when I'm waiting for an appointment.
Yeah.
If you pull up the,
yes.
hints are 50-50. Applying to you, you're.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
It's not. You gotta be real
And you don't always get all the hints all at once too. So I talk about that too in the video of, they like to string you along to try to keep you on the hook of paying. So there's lots of, other tips and tricks I have specifically for Ancestry on that video.
How can I get a hold of your previous, handout?
You can send me an email. So my email is on the top of the handout, and I will email you any of the past ones.
And do you have old copies there at the library?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, so all we have is electronic ones. But if you want a printed version, you can definitely come to the library and print it out.
Thank you so much for doing this.
So the recording of this will be on YouTube probably later tonight. So if you missed any of it, or people who want to watch it again, it will be on there later tonight. So go to this YouTube channel. Again, if you go to our playlist, right here is that genealogy series for seniors playlist where you'll be able to find that recording. So here's all the past ones on here for those virtual people. What else we got here?
Do you think that if I was
Questions here. Let's see. What if there isn't a printer-friendly selection on the funeral home obituary? You can also copy and paste it into like a Word document or like a Google Doc and do that. I would copy and paste that into a different document and print it out. How do you save things from Ancestry? So if you have a paid subscription, let's see if I have mine logged in here. You would just download from the Ancestry page. Oh, I'm logged in. Good. So I can show you how to do that. So for example, if you click in on your person and you find a census record, for example, let's go here. Say I found this census record. If you go into it, to save it, what you do is there's this little wrench icon, or it will offer you to save it. So you can save it to your computer, or the little wrench icon. You can also download it right there. So those are how you would save something when you find it on Ancestry, if you have a paid subscription, or if you're using the library edition.
Offering it for 60% off. Gosh.
Holy crap.
Which one is it? My heritage. Wow. That's
Let's see.
and I know some people.
Again, it will be on YouTube later this evening.
Cheaper and.
All right, any other questions or comments? Thank you everyone for hanging in here and attending.
Yeah, well, it's frustrating to me because I. No, I have no.
All right, take care, everyone.